In Australia right now, hundreds of people are lining up just to be rejected for housing. Not to view it, not to negotiate, just to submit an application they'll never hear back from. This is what demand looks like when it collides with a system that can't keep up. But wait. Before we begin, please subscribe to ensure that you never miss out on any of my essential stuff. Comment "I subscribe" below, and I will personally welcome you to our community. With that said, let's get started. The belief. You grow up hearing the same story. Work hard. Save your deposit. Buy a home. Build your future. For decades, that worked. Australia had space, jobs, and a mortgage system that made sense. The belief was simple. If you earned a decent income, home ownership was within reach. Your parents did it. Their parents did it. The Australian dream wasn't just possible, it was expected. You finish school, get a trade or degree, work for 10 years, and buy a house. Maybe not in the best suburb, but something. A foothold. A start. That belief still exists. It's still sold to every kid in every school. But the system underneath it has collapsed. The reality. The median house price in Sydney is now $1.6 million. In Melbourne, it's $1.1 million. Brisbane just crossed $900,000. Meanwhile, the median household income in Australia is $116,000 a year. Do the math. A couple earning the national average would need to save every dollar for 10 years. No rent, no food, no life. Just to afford a 20% deposit in Sydney. And that's before interest rates. Here's where it breaks down. Even if you have the deposit, banks won't always lend to you. Borrowing capacity has been slashed. A household that could have borrowed $800,000 3 years ago now qualifies for $550,000. Interest rates hit 4.35% in 2023. Repayments on a $600,000 loan jumped from $2,600 a month to $3,400. That's an extra $9,600 a year. Just in interest. So you're stuck. Too rich to qualify for social housing. Too poor to buy. Renting forever in a market where landlords hold all the power. This isn't a temporary squeeze. This is structural. And here's the kicker. Wages haven't kept up. Not even close. Between 2000 and 2024, Australian house prices increased by 340%. Wages, 94%. You're not failing because you're not trying hard enough. You're failing because the math doesn't work anymore. This is the part nobody plans for. The proof. Let me show you what this looks like on the ground. In February 2024, a one-bedroom apartment in Parramatta, a suburb 23 kilometers from Sydney CBD, had 140 groups apply for a single inspection. Not 140 people. 140 groups. Families, couples, singles. The landlord didn't even bother with interviews. They just picked one application at random. One application. Out of 140. That same month, a report from Domain found that renters in Sydney are now spending 34% of their income on rent. In Brisbane, it's 32%. The financial stress threshold is 30%. You cross that line, and you're in survival mode. One unexpected bill, car repair, medical emergency, anything, and you're behind. This is the part nobody plans for. You think you'll rent for a few years, save up, and get out. But rent is rising faster than wages. You're not saving. You're treading water. According to Anglicare's 2024 Rental Affordability Snapshot, only 1.1% of rental properties in Australia are affordable for a single person on minimum wage. 1%. For a couple on minimum wage, it's 2.4%. For a single parent on JobSeeker, it's 0%. Zero. And that's just the beginning. In regional areas, places people used to escape to for affordability, prices have exploded. Ballarat, once a cheap alternative to Melbourne, now has a median house price of $650,000. Toowoomba in Queensland hit $580,000. The escape hatch has closed. Here's where it gets worse. Rental vacancies in Australia are sitting at 1.1% nationally. A healthy rental market needs 3% vacancy to keep prices stable and give renters options. At 1.1%, landlords can charge whatever they want. And they do. In Adelaide, rents increased 18% in a single year. In Perth, 16%. In Darwin, 14%. People aren't just priced out of buying. They're being priced out of existing. The human cost. Here's what happens when the system breaks. Families split up. Parents move in with adult children. Couples stay in toxic relationships because leaving means homelessness. A 34-year-old teacher in Melbourne told the ABC she's been renting the same apartment for 6 years. Her landlord just increased rent by $120 a week. She can't afford it, but every place she applies to has 60-plus applicants. She makes $85,000 a year. She has stable employment. She's been a model tenant, and she's about to be homeless. This isn't Ray. Australia's homelessness rate has surged 14% since 2016. Over 122,000 people are experiencing homelessness on any given night, and that's the official count, which doesn't capture people couch surfing or living in cars. The fastest growing group, women over 55. Let me explain why. These are women who spent their lives raising kids, often in single-income households. They sacrifice career progression for family. Then divorce hits, or their partner dies, and suddenly they are 55, alone, with minimal superannuation and no property. They can't compete with younger renters who have 2 incomes. They can't afford deposits. They age out of the workforce before they can rebuild savings. So they end up in cars, in tents, in crisis accommodation that was never meant to be permanent. This is the part nobody plans for. Here's where it breaks down. Young professionals, doctors, engineers, teachers, are leaving Australia entirely. Not because they don't want to stay, because they've done the math and realized they'll never own a home here. A junior doctor in Sydney can earn $80,000 a year. Sounds decent, right? After tax, that's $62,000. Rent for a one-bedroom apartment in a halfway decent suburb, $35,000 a year. Food, transport, utilities, another $15,000. That leaves $12,000 for everything else. And savings. To save a $200,000 deposit for a $1 million apartment, they'd need 16 years. Assuming 0 rent increases, 0 emergencies, 0 life. Or they move to London, where housing is expensive but at least possible. Or New Zealand, where $600,000 still buys a house. New Zealand, Canada, the UK, anywhere the numbers make sense. Australia is exporting its talent because it can't house them. And that's just the beginning. The escalation. So why is this happening? You'd think it's simple, not enough homes. And you'd be half right. Australia is short roughly 175,000 homes right now. We need to build 50,000 more homes per year for the next decade just to close the gap. But here's the thing. We are not even close. In 2023, Australia approved 168,000 new dwellings. Sounds good, right? Except 40% of those approvals never get built. Developers sit on land. Construction companies collapse. Supply chain delays kill momentum. Here's where it breaks down. Labor shortages have crippled construction. Australia needs 90,000 additional construction workers by 2027 just to meet current demand. We are training 30,000. Material costs have exploded. Timber prices doubled. Steel, cement, wiring, all up 40 to 60% since 2020. And builders are going bankrupt at record rates. Porter Davis, ProBuild, Condev, all collapsed in the last 2 years, leaving thousands of homes unfinished and buyers stranded. Meanwhile, immigration is adding 500,000 people a year. That's an entire Canberra. Every single year. Those people need housing. Now. And that's just the beginning. State governments have released land on the urban fringe, places like Melton, Werribee, and the outer edges of Brisbane. But there's no infrastructure, no schools, no hospitals, no reliable public transport. A family buys a house in Melton, 50 kilometers from Melbourne CBD. The commute is 2 hours each way. The nearest hospital is 30 minutes by car. The local school is overcrowded, so people won't move there. They stay in the cities, competing for the same shrinking pool of housing. This is the part nobody plans for. Investors own 40% of all housing stock in Australia. They are not buying homes to live in, they are buying assets. Negative gearing and capital gains tax concessions make property the safest investment in the country. You can lose money on rent and still profit when you sell. Here's how it works. An investor buys a $700,000 property. They rent it out for $500 a week, $26,000 a year. But their mortgage, rates, and maintenance cost $35,000 a year. They are losing $9,000 annually. But negative gearing lets them deduct that loss from their taxable income. If they earn $120,000, they now only pay tax on $111,000. Then they hold the property for 10 years. It appreciates to $1.1 million. They sell. Capital gains tax only applies to 50% of the profit. So they made $400,000, but only pay tax on $200,000. Meanwhile, a first home buyer offering $705,000 loses to the investor offering $710,000. Every time. Because they can afford to lose in the short term. So investors outbid first home buyers. Every time. Because the system is designed to reward them. And that's just the beginning. The numbers don't lie. Here's what the data actually shows. In 1990, first home buyers made up 40% of all property purchases in Australia. By 2024, that number dropped to 24%. Investors now make up 36% of all buyers. The highest rate in Australian history. In some suburbs, the ratio is worse. In Parramatta, 52% of recent sales went to investors. In Box Hill, Melbourne, 47%. First home buyers aren't even in the game anymore. Here's where it gets worse. The average age of a first home buyer in Australia is now 36 years old. In 1990, it was 26. That's a decade of lost wealth building. A decade of paying someone else's mortgage. A decade where life, kids, career moves, relationships gets put on hold. This is the part nobody plans for. And let's talk about what homeownership actually does. It's not just shelter. It's wealth. It's stability. It's leverage. A homeowner can borrow against equity to start a business, invest, or weather a crisis. A renter has none of that. By age 65, the average homeowner in Australia has a net worth of $1.3 million. The average renter, $150,000. That's not a gap. That's a chasm. And it's widening. The political reality. So why isn't this being fixed? Here's the uncomfortable truth. 67% of Australian federal politicians own investment properties. The average MP owns 2.5 properties. They benefit directly from rising house prices. Their wealth is tied to the system staying exactly as it is. When Labor proposed scaling back negative gearing in 2019, they lost the election. The real estate lobby spent millions convincing Australians that touching negative gearing would crash the market. It worked. Here's where it breaks down. Every solution has a cost. And the people who would pay that cost are the ones making the decisions. Build more social housing. That requires billions in funding and political will. And it doesn't win elections. Cut immigration. That costs the economy $50 billion a year in productivity and tax revenue. Scrap negative gearing. Property investors, many of them older Australians who vote reliably, will rebel. So nothing happens. This is the part nobody plans for. Both major parties talk about housing affordability, but their policies tinker at the edges. First Home Super Saver Scheme. Help to Buy. Rent-to-Own programs. None of it addresses the core problem. Housing has been turned into an investment commodity, and the people who should live in it can't afford to compete. And that's just the beginning. The future. Let me show you what happens next. Right now, there are two Australias forming. One where people own property, often multiple properties, and watch their wealth multiply while doing nothing. And one where people work full-time, earn decent incomes, and will never own anything. This isn't about fairness. This is about math. If the average person can't afford to buy and can barely afford to rent, what happens to the economy when an entire generation has no savings, no equity, and no stability? What happens when teachers, nurses, and tradespeople can't afford to live in the cities they serve? Here's where it breaks down. Australia's economy relies on consumer spending. But if people are spending 40% of their income on rent, they're not buying cars, eating out, or starting businesses. Retail suffers. Small businesses close. Innovation stalls. and the wealth gap becomes permanent. By 2040, the Reserve Bank estimates that homeownership rates in Australia will drop below 60% for the first time since World War II. That means 40% of Australians will rent for life. No security, no equity, no retirement plan. This is the part nobody plans for. Because here's what renting in retirement looks like. You're 70 years old. You on the pension, $29,000 a year. Rent is $400 a week. That's $20,800. You have $8,200 left for food, medicine, transport, and everything else. One rent increase, and you're homeless. This isn't a distant hypothetical. This is already happening. The uncomfortable question. Some people say build more. Some say cut immigration. Some say scrap negative gearing. But none of that happens fast enough. Because the people who make the rules are the ones who already own property. Federal politicians, state MPs, local councillors, they've all benefited from rising house prices. Their constituents who vote most reliably, older homeowners who don't want property values to drop. So the incentive structure is broken. Fixing the housing crisis means making housing cheaper. And making housing cheaper means current owners lose wealth. Nobody votes for that. Here's where it breaks down. This isn't a problem that gets solved by good intentions. It requires someone to lose. Either property owners accept lower prices, or renters accept permanent exclusion. There's no middle ground that makes everyone happy. So here's the question. If the system benefits the people in power, why would they ever fix it?